we're coming towards the end of our sessions. Now, that energy that we had on the first day, those engagements that we had, the level of energy that we had on the first day, I hope maybe in this last day, we will still maintain that level of energy right up to the end until we close. So this will be our fourth plenary session, which then we are going to, it will be we are going to receive the presentation on this fourth plenary session from the General Secretary of the GPSSBC, Mayor Shali Audit. Can we give a big round of applause for her as she comes and introduces to us? She will outline the whole topic, what's going to talk about from here. Then we will engage with the presentation. Thank you very
much. Thank you, Program Director. We can see that it is indeed day 4, because the Program Director has introduced me as your speaker, when I'm in fact your chairperson of the session. But you are forgiven, it is day 4, and it is been a significant deliberations over the past 3 days. And as we're getting into day 4, we trust it's going to be even more meaningful. Good morning, leadership, Minister, Deputy Minister, DG from the DPSA, leadership of the trade unions that are present, and all our colleagues from the PSCBC, as well as the Sector Voting Council, the PSCBC Chairperson, Mayor Dimo, and the General Secretary of the PSCBC as well, Mr. Dubrain. Colleagues, as we're coming to the conclusion of the summit, this morning's plenary is focused on recognizing the role of women, youth, and people with disabilities in the workplace, providing the necessary support to allow for equal opportunities and eradicating practices of discrimination, harassment, and victimization. Furthermore, the theme recognizes the role of women in being the primary caregiver of the families through the implementation of basic childcare policy. Now, as we all know, South Africa became the 10th country in the world on the 29th of November 2021 to ratify the ILO's Convention on Violence and Harassment, or C190 as it's known. And it is indeed encouraging that the PSCBC has placed on the summit agenda this theme through which our deliberations this morning could consider alignment and compliance to C190 as part of the summit outcomes. At the last conference that I spoke at, being the PSI conference in October, this convention was not ratified, and it was perplexing that South Africa, with all of its wonderful processes and legislation advancements, that we had not at that time ratified. So it is indeed heartwarming that we have since ratified, and that as a country we take it very seriously, and that we as the PSCBC, through our deliberations, include this social reform in our processes as well. So to provide us with a perspective and to kick off our deliberations this morning, we're going to receive an address through a presentation from Ms. Fanani Manugu. Ms. Manugu is the Director, Transformation at the DPSA. Please welcome her with a resounding round of applause. Thank you.
Good morning. morning, everyone. Thank you, Chairperson, Minister, Deputy Minister, DG, and all the leadership of trade unions, and ladies and gentlemen. Mine is not a very long presentation because the DG has already covered most of the presentation, actually. I'm only going to talk about the areas that she hasn't touched. But before I start, can I check? Is there anyone who can't see the presentation? That's how we operate in the area that I work. So everybody can see the presentation. I don't have to be descriptive. Thank you. This presentation is looking at the recognition of women, youth and people with disabilities in the workplace, and in the process provide the necessary support which will allow for equal opportunities. And by doing that, it means we need to eradicate the practices of discrimination, harassment and victimization. And then the last part, looking at the dual roles that women do in the workplace, their private life, where they are primary caregivers, and at the same time expected to perform at their best. This is the content. Looks at the background and our problem statement, and then a little bit of the progress that we have achieved up to so far, which I've already indicated that the part that the DG has already covered, I'm not going to repeat. And then we look at the policy interventions, and then program interventions, and then the last part will be the next steps. The background here is that the sector that I'm representing today here is a sector that we know that over the past years has suffered a lot of marginalization, and hence we start with the President's State of the National Address when he talks about not leaving anyone behind. And you'll recall that my greeting at first, when I wanted to check if there's anyone who cannot see the presentation, it's specifically for that we don't leave anyone behind. The second part, we know that where we come from, the sector of women, persons with disabilities, youth, has suffered a lot of marginalization. And then here we are giving the overview of the progress that we have achieved so far. And then we look at what is in place. And then the last part as indicated. The problem statement here is divided into 4 areas, where we look back before 1994, the adverse effect of discrimination, and then the second part, those of you who have done research on issues of transformation, you will recall that there are a lot of researchers who have indicated that as we moved into democracy, there was a realization that a lot of HR potential has been lost because certain people were left outside. And then also looking at the issue of discrimination in general and sexual harassment that created an unsafe working environment. And then what followed was government coming up with tools to deal with that. First being legislative reforms, and the next one being the setting of equity targets. And then the last part deals with progress. And you see there, we have indicated that although we talk of progress, we know that it has been very slow. We haven't up to now met our equity targets. And then the second concern is that the public service doesn't have a good representation of young people. I wanted this to also be part of the problem statement. And I know that the DG presented on this slide, but I want it to be part of the problem statement because the way we have put it, you can see that these are two triangles. The top triangle shows you the representation of women and men in the public service, which is bottom heavy of women, and then at the top, men only form 38%. But in the bottom triangle, it is bottom light with representation of women at senior management, and yet at the top, it's heavy with the representation of men. And it was specifically for this reason where we included it here as a problem statement because if we have more women in the public service in all other levels, why is it so difficult to have them at senior management? This one deals with the progress, and I'm not going to repeat that because we know that these are the reforms that we've had. The Constitution is very clear. I haven't even cited all other legislation because the Constitution itself has been very clear in the Bill of Rights when it comes to issues of representation. And zooming in specifically for the public service, being the white paper on the transformation of the public service, which came up with a very first setting of targets for the representation of Black people, women at SMS, and the representation of persons with disabilities. And in this case, you recall, with the DG's representation, she indicated that the representation of Black people is at 85%. We managed to get this at the time that it was said to be achieved, but unfortunately, all the other representation targets have not yet been met up to so far. And to support this, the white paper on affirmative action, which was forcing a government to come up with affirmative action measures to achieve these targets. And the last aspect is that we are not only doing it for ourselves as a country. The chair has indicated the ratification of Convention 190. We also have several conventions that we are obligated to meet because we have ratified them. So whenever we deal with transformation, it means we're also looking at the convention on the elimination of discrimination against women. We are looking at the Beijing Platform for Action. We are looking at continental conventions that were signed at AU, SADC ones that deal with either gender or disability or youth that we need to access and which we report regularly. I'm not going to touch on this. You'll recall that I said those that the DG has already dealt with, I'm not going to repeat. I'm going to talk about now the implementation of strategies. On gender, what is it that we have done in the public service? We have our gender equality strategic framework, which the impact that we can talk about is how we have seen issues of women empowerment. Because at the same time, when we're trying to meet the targets, we need to make sure that there are programs that will support the meeting of these equity targets. You'll recall the DG indicated that when we got into democracy in 1994, we only had 5% of the representation of women at SMS. And in order to make sure that we move from that 5%, there should have been programs that will support that. And the Gender Equality Strategic Framework is one of those that has 4 strategic objectives that look at capacity development, that look at organizational support, that look at economic development, that look at institutional mechanisms that we put in place to make sure that women who get into the public service, into leadership positions, get this support. And out of this, then came the Public Service Women Management Week, which is a reporting mechanism for the implementation of the HOD's 8 Principal Action Plan for promoting women's empowerment and gender equality, which is a program that took the gender mainstreaming in the public service from how it was approached in the past, where it was the responsibility of a gender focal point in a department who could have been sitting at a very low position in HR and put the responsibility at the office of the HOD in the department to see to it that gender mainstreaming happens. And then we also have to address issues of sexual harassment, the policy and procedure on the management of sexual harassment. And what is impacting on, it's a uniform approach, because when we were consulting departments on this, the kind of stories that we got were that there's no uniform approach, there's no systematic approach on how one department or even one unit in a department will handle issues of sexual harassment. And that is what this has been trying to achieve so far. And then the last one is the guidelines on child care facilities that the DPSA has also introduced. On disability specifically, we have a similar framework, which is called the Job Access Strategic Framework for the appointment, recruitment, and retention of persons with disabilities. And it also has a directive and implementation guidelines. The issue here being that when it comes to the appointment of persons with disabilities, the usual complaint or the usual excuse is that we cannot find the persons with disabilities anywhere. And yet that is not the case, or they don't have the necessary qualification, the inherent requirements of a job. And this is what this is trying to address. And this, we also beefed it up with a policy on reasonable accommodation and assistive devices. Because one of the findings from the Public Service Commission study on this area found that managers were reluctant to appoint persons with disabilities in the public service because they felt their reasonable accommodation needs and assistive devices is costly. And this was meant to show that it is not all disabilities that will need reasonable accommodation and assistive devices. And even if they do, you may buy once and the rest of the time you'll just be maintaining those. I'm also going to skip these ones, the DG has already spoken at length to those. And then I come now to issues of interventions. We have seen how COVID-19 has shown the disproportionate burdens that women carried as primary caregivers and as employees who needed to be productive in the workplace. The barriers to participation, and then that is the second area where we felt due to COVID-19, a lot of people were unable to participate, and with women being in lower positions, I think it was even raised in some of the commissions where they were presenting on ICT, how some people were unable to participate because they didn't have the tools of the trade. And obviously, it means those will be in majority women because they are in lower positions. And again, as a consequence of COVID-19, the increase in domestic violence, unpaid care duties, more especially for persons with disabilities, where because a lot of things were closed down, where people could not travel, where some persons with disabilities who needed personal assistance, they couldn't access those because of the closure brought in by COVID-19. And then here in terms of programmatic interventions, the first one that I want to indicate is the gender responsive planning, budgeting, monitoring, evaluation, and auditing framework, which is aimed at making gender mainstreaming being part of the planning processes. Because one of the challenges that we know why we find ourselves where we are, is because the planning part, when it comes to issues of gender, of disability or youth, is lacking. And after all, if you don't plan for it, it will never happen. And then the monitoring and evaluation, which is the next one, it's how in our monitoring tools for the two frameworks that I spoke about, for the policy and procedure on the management of sexual harassment, where we need to find out from departments how far are they having support mechanisms to make sure that women get economically empowered, women are not victims, perpetually victims of sexual harassment, etc. Representation, this I can't overemphasize, because there is pride in working for yourself, more especially in the disability sector. That is where the cry is about that I don't want a disability grant, I want to work for myself. There is pride in that. And then what we're also doing is that the departments that are not meeting these targets, we expect them to come up with remedial plans. And I can tell you that this has also worked in some cases, because when we started this process, we had departments that had representation below 30%. 30% that you recall should have been met by 2005. And when we require them to come up with remedial plans, I have departments that were below 30% that have now achieved the 50% and are even maintaining it today. And then we also share benchmarks with departments. If we have good practices that are happening in particular departments, we share those with departments that are struggling. And then we also have partnerships with women's organizations. We have partnerships with youth formations. We have partnerships with organizations for persons with disabilities in order for them to assist us with strategies on how we can achieve transformation in these marginalized areas. And then we also conduct advocacy sessions. And then the last one, which is the most difficult, is the issue of stigma. Because I can tell you that I think even the DG raised it, that it is not true that the public service has not met the target for persons with disabilities. But because of the stigma on employees who have psychosocial disabilities, where they are afraid to disclose because they know that if they declare this disability, if you look at me standing here and I've told you that I have this psychosocial disability, you start asking yourself, is it Fanan who's talking, or is this other personality that is talking? So people are afraid to declare those. And this is actually our biggest struggle, because this is a mindset that is very difficult to deal with. Hence, even the study by the Public Service Commission, the managers were reluctant. Because they just assume that if I hire a person with a disability, then it means the burden of getting this person reasonable accommodation and assistive devices is going to be a challenge. Our next step, which is my last slide before I thank you, we are going to review the policy and procedure on the management of sexual harassment in order to incorporate some of the issues that we have to cover from C190. And besides C190, on the 3rd of March this year, the Minister of Employment and Labour also signed the Code of Good Practice on the handling of sexual harassment cases in the workplace. And this is the part where issues of bullying have been identified. So when we review this policy, these are some of the things that we want to include. And then the disaggregation of data, it's one of our biggest problems. In our area of work, when I live here and somebody asks me, you are coming back from a summit, how many women were there? How many men were there? How many then were there? I should be able to tell somebody those kind of facts, because when we talk about not leaving anyone behind, it means self-representation is very important. And then in terms of beneficiaries of all our programs that we provide as government, there is a need to understand when we say that we build 50 houses, it should be clear who are the people who benefited from these houses. And it should be by fluke that because we have more women in this country, you have 40 of them that have gone to women, and you think you have done well, but you didn't plan it that way. It is because of the fluke of numbers. And then the next intervention in terms of steps, we also want to encourage, the senior managers to get the training on gender responsive budgeting, because one of the biggest problems is that when it comes to budgeting for gender, senior managers will tell you it has nothing to do with me, because we don't understand that every program that we have in government has everything to do with women, with persons with disabilities, and with youth. In 2018, when the performance agreement for HODs were reviewed, we included in the government priorities the need for HODs to have specific indicators on the meeting of equity targets for youth, for women, and for persons with disabilities. And I think what we would like to see now is for this to be cascaded for all managers in the public service to have this commitment. And the last one is the implementation of child care programs, which, despite the fact that the PSA has provided a framework, this is not something that I can proudly say is happening in government departments. And with that, this is how we say thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Manugo, for that very informative presentation, giving us an up-to-date perspective of where the public service is currently in terms of gender, people with disabilities, and youth. Colleagues, this brings us to the session in terms of, grading our discussions and participation from the floor. And it is my pleasure to open up the floor for your comments, questions, and any matters that you would want us to address, either Ms. Manugo or myself, or any of the leadership that is in the room as well. Can I call upon questions? Or I see a hand on this side. I'm going to look on this side as well. I've got a hand there. Okay, can I start with the first hand, the gentleman on this side? You can just please make your way to the microphone and introduce yourself and provide your comments, please.
Asibingelele indlu yonke. Sanibonani and good morning. Igama lami uJabulani Makhubo. Ngivela kule nyonyana okuthiwa iNehawu. Chairperson, we firstly want to hear the department speaking to the implementation of Resolution 6 of 2010 insofar as childcare facility is concerned, in terms of which departments have moved in this instance. That's the first point we wanted to make. The second point, Chair, is a painful experience that in one department, in relation to the disability, particularly psychodisabilities, we are sitting today with a case where an employee who's got psycho problem has been subjected to disciplinary hearing, including this 100 meters, what you call it, the interdict. The case is still proceeding. This person there's no suspension, he can't come to work because of the interdict. What is the capacity of department in assisting managers, supervisors, managers to understand and appreciate and give assistance to these types of employees? We wanted to talk to, the third point we wanted to talk to is the issue of the recognition of, and in inverted commas, Chair, of housewife or house husbands as employees, precisely because I see the chairperson as a woman, smart, and because there's a person who assisted you to be.
No, it was for me.
Now,
You predicted. Please go ahead.
elsewhere in the country, there's a recognition of women sitting at home supporting husbands who are becoming smart at work because of that pillar.
So support to the husbands who are supporting the wives to become smart at work.
Vice versa.
We get you.
Chair, the presentation speaks to the legislations, prescriptions, the injunctions. We just want to understand the capacity of government, state as the employer, of enforcement of these legislations and injunctions. Your Equity Act, for an example, your Skills Development Act, for an example. And Chair, lastly, can we be told as to what is it that is done in relation to the infrastructure in relation to disabilities? Both people with eyesight problem, ear, and physical disabilities necessarily, let me put it in that fashion. Can we hear what is the plan in that instance? Thanks very much.
Thank you. There's a number of comments, in between some questions. I'm sure we will get some answers from the floor as well, and I'll give our speaker an opportunity as well. Ma'am, Ms. Ashishiri. It's just behind you. Okay, now I see a microphone is coming to you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, Honorable Minister and Deputy Minister DG, Chair of the Chairs and Chairperson of the session, Program Director, and all protocol observed. Look, Chair, we will speak about this topic until the demands of women are met. And I think the Program Director, Dade Khalorale, understands the statement very much better. Mine is not a question, but is an input. And this is the topic that is, I think all of you know that it is very dear and close to my heart as a woman, as a mother, and and as that. 3 dots. As government, we have policies, very beautiful policies about the gender issues. And we cannot today, in 2022, still talking about Beijing, still talking about the white paper on affirmative action. We cannot, colleagues. And I'm raising this to the parties to the council, that We have very beautiful policies. We have the charter that is talking to all these issues of dignity, ethics, and all these kind of issues. My input is that as we're going to do this declaration, this matter should not come next time as just a topic for presentation. We need to come and say, where to from here in terms of making sure that these issues are addressed. We have not yet, and it's a fact, we have not yet addressed the issues that affect women. I'm responsible for employee relations and health and wellness. I can tell you today that 80% of women that are suffering from depression are 80% of people at the workplace or employees that are suffering from depression, psychosocial, and all these other disorders are women because of the issues that they get either from home or from work. Now, we need to strengthen the capacity, we need to strengthen the implementation, and we need to, above all, monitor. Yes, GS, I will say until the demands of women are met. And we cannot be sitting last year or this year, last year we're told, is it last year or this year in Malang? We're told that to achieve some of the targets of women will take 200 years. And I was saying, wow, it can't be. So, Labour, you are seated there, you are part of the process. You are signatories to the charter. Employer is a signatory to the charter that is there to enforce and implement Chapter 2 of the Bill of Rights of our own constitution that we vouched for and that we supported. So my input, Honorable Presenter, is that next year when we come here, or in the next 5 years when we come to another summit, we need to get a report that will be talking to the actual implementation and programs and how these were monitored. Not the numbers as we are reporting every time. How many SMS members? 15. How many programs? No, 5. We cannot be going there. We need to start being on the field, on the ground, and attend to these issues and come up with programs of how do we help women. Gender-based violence is rife. How many people, how many women were raped in the workplace, in their own offices? How many people or how many women got their jobs because out of desperation, out of poverty, they had to open their legs so that they can get some employment? It's a fact, it's real. Now, as government, we really need to go to a higher level because we've been talking about this for the past 25 years, for as long as democracy existed. In 2000, those who are NTPS, you can go to your records. There is an excerpt that I wrote in the booklet of Minister of Public and Administration about me and my experiences as a woman in 2000. So go back and look there. Those problems are still existing and affecting other women who are not as vocal as I am, because I am going to be, and I'm going to represent those women until as government and me as part of government may going to make sure that the voices of the women and those women are protected, both by labor and by government. Because labor, you are equally failing to represent these women. You are equally failing to make sure that the demands of women, to make sure that women are protected from their managers that victimize them, that harass them, that threatens them, that make them to be their subjects in the workplace. So as we move in, Chair, to this declaration, and if this matter is not addressed as part of the declaration, we will continue to make sure that government and labor equally are forced to make sure that these gender issues, particularly women, are addressed. Because women cannot die. We cannot look at our children, we cannot look at our sisters, we cannot look at our mothers who are also general workers and are still abused at the workplace. Because as government, we have policies, but we don't have mechanism or a focal point that will be physical on the ground and dealing with these matters. Chair, I thank you. Malbongwe.
Thank you for that input, Ms. Mashiri. I'm sure that we've taken note, and most definitely my inputs to the declaration will include the submissions you've made. Minister, I see your hand up. I do have 2 hands up at the back of the room. Colleagues, can I take Minister first, and I will come to you. Thank you. Should I take the hands in the back, Minister? Thank you so much. Sorry, colleagues, before you take your seat, I've got 1, 2, 3. Can I start with the gentleman? Let's give the gentleman a voice first, and then the 2 ladies will follow. Thank you.
Morning. My name is Mlungisi Ndlovu. I'm from PSA. Firstly, let me assure all the women that are here that PSA is one of the known unions that has been defending the rights of women, the right of members when it comes to transformations. That's why we defeat government in arbitrations, in review applications, even when we have won cases where we feel that our members are treated unfairly. Government will use their resource to review decision to frustrate us in the process. So we are dedicated in these particular transformations. But my approach is different. Firstly, we need to appreciate the role of the state and also organized labor in pushing for transformation. We are sitting here today. It's much difference pre-1994 and after. That's why you have people in certain positions. But we need to be able to change the game because we need to see the role of HR, especially comrades who are from HR today. They became helpless in most of the work institutions because they're supposed to enforce the transformation agenda. Transformation agenda is in totality because there are workplaces where they are doing well, where women have been promoted. There are workplaces where even males are underrepresented. If you look at the employment equity reports, the commissions, look at the issues of disabilities that are in the top management. It's still sitting at 1.6%. Where is the problem? It starts at the entry level because the space is not open for qualified people with disability to enter the employment. So if your internship program is not meant to push them in leadership positions, where are you going to get them? That's the good question. And another challenge is that we seem to have dropped the ball when it comes to ensuring that there are committees in the workplace to ensure that organized labor is involved, to ensure that there is employment equity, to ensure that management employer is transparent in sending and sharing the report with organized labor. Because these things need to be well coordinated. So what we're saying is that it is the time to give the HR community the teeth to bite because the HR community need to play a role to ensure that these committees are effective. I can tell you that some of the departments, they don't even have a clear employment equity plan. They don't submit the report on time. It's unfortunate that Department of Labor is not here in terms of ensuring that you're able to implement that. And also, how do you then protect the people that have been promoted? I'm saying PSA is defending some of the managers who have been promoted, whether they are women in senior positions, because they want to enforce policies. Then there is an interference, whether from the political side, where they want to push for cadre deployment, they get frustrated. How many of those that are suspended now for the past 3 years? So because they want to get rid of them, we need to see how do we then protect them. Lastly, the issue of youth. As I've said, government need to have a very clear succession plan in terms of the employment equity. You employed interns every day, and some of these interns, you make them buy toilet papers, photocopying machines, and do all other things instead of identifying them to senior positions. If you compare government and private sector, in private sector, I can appoint a graduate to be a team leader in the production line. But in government, you need 35 years, 15 years to reach in that particular position. Your processes in terms of the recruitment are excluding the young people to the process. And the elder within government must accept the reality that their time to retire will come. They must open the space for the young people. Amanda.
Thank you. I'm just going to give the opportunity to the gentleman that's standing at the back there, and then we will come back to you. You'll be the next speaker. Yes. Just going to ask someone to turn up the microphone. Yeah, you can go for it. Please, if you can just speak into the mic, we really can't hear you at the front. It's been cleaned, I assure you it's safe.
No, let me appreciate the engagement, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mailena. I'm from Health. First, let me appreciate the fact that there has been efforts by the department to seek ops plans, work plans with respect to matters of health and wellness. But my concern in this respect, Minister and colleagues, when was the last review of the structure for wellness in the government? I've comfortably heard the laments raised by both Comrade Mapito with respect to attention. Do we have sufficient resources to intervene as government in dealing with those aspects? And if we have, are we sure of the number of and levels of those colleagues? Given the fact that some of the people who may need psychosocial support might be colleagues who are higher than the very people that set the structures. And what is the plan? That will be my point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We can come back to the side of the room.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Minister, Deputy Minister, and all protocol observed. I just want to add as a comment to say, I appreciate the fact that some other levels of harassment will be looked at, not only sexual, because the previous speaker said most of the women are suffering from depression, and most of it comes from the workplace. I just want to indicate as well that we as senior managers get harassed, get intimidated by the very lower level people. They connive, they make some kind of groups, and whatever you put on the table, you'll see, including, and I'm talking from experience, from the two departments that I've been in, including the very organized labor. They will harass you, they will victimize you, they will intimidate you and prevent you from doing your work. So I appreciate the fact that you are going to look at other forms of harassment. And I'm saying, when I put a grievance against the person that I felt was harassing me, that grievance has never been attended up to now. On top of that, when you have what we call the grievance hearing, you are surrounded by men. There's no woman around who can actually listen to your case and really take it forward. You report to men, they are the ones who are judging the issue, and they don't even understand where you come from. So I'm saying, and I've been told, you cannot lodge a grievance against a lower level person. How good is that, really? If at all they are harassing you, where do you go? In fact, I've been told you need to discipline them. How do you discipline a person who's harassing you and who's over you like this? How do you? And there's not even a support from the people that you are reporting the grievance to, you know? So I want you to please have a look at how senior managers are also oppressed by the juniors.
Thank you.
How senior managers are also oppressed by organized labor. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Yes. And a woman, I'm speaking for other women. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have another woman. Ma'am?
Good morning to the Minister, Deputy Minister, Program Director, all protocols observed. I'm Fiona Woodley from NAPTOSA, the National Professional Teachers Organization of South Africa. And I just want to stand by the previous speaker in terms of a pleas, in terms of grievance procedure and what is exactly happening. I just want to provide some support to her because she seems like she needs it. In that grievance procedure doesn't mean that a senior person cannot lodge a grievance against a junior person. It's generally unhappiness in the workplace. So she must definitely pursue whatever unhappiness or grievances that she's found because the law does provide protection. Chairperson, I want to basically speak about C190. Coming from a schooling environment and coming from the education sector, NAPTOSA and others in the sector have an added responsibility in terms of protecting learners as well. We have that added responsibility being part of social responsibility, but it's so much more than that. It's part of our jobs. We are in loco parentis of these children in the schools, and we have to protect them. So sexual harassment with learners in schools as well as employees in the sector is very rife. And I really want to pick on this because this is something that's not spoken of, and especially at forums like this. In terms of government's capacity and the different departments in government to deal with harassment in the workplace. Now, C190 is harassment, violence and harassment in the world of work. And this really has opened up the definition of workplace because it doesn't just mean your workstation, it doesn't just mean a school, a district office, or a department office. It means anywhere where you are carrying out your duties as an employee. When we find harassment from people like parents, when we are teachers in schools, from governing body, you in the health sector might find harassment from patients, and the C190 covers all of that. We've had recent incidences where nurses were attacked by patients, actually several incidents, and C190 covers that. So we as government, we need to look at how it is we can actually develop policy to protect our people in the workplace from these variables besides protecting us from each other. Now, we have, as was said by previous speakers as well, excellent policies, a brilliant constitution. Now with us ratifying C190, we also have the Code of Good Practice on handling of sexual harassment cases in the workplace. But what I really want to focus on is the capacity of the departments to deal with these issues when they are brought to their attention. And it doesn't seem to be a will to act decisively or to act quickly. And we find that perpetrators of harassment and violence in the workplace allowed to stay in the workplace with the victims and provide a very hostile working environment. And we understand that nobody can be productive if they're working in fear or if they're working under intimidation. So we need the departments to act quickly on reports or allegations against employees in the workplace. I also want to remind the summit of Section 50 of the of the Equity Act, which talks about vicarious liability, that if the employer does not act against any allegations of harassment, then the employer is as liable as the perpetrator. And we seem to ignore this coming from the Equity Act. So we would not want the failure of the employer to act when these serious allegations come to their notice, because it just perpetuates harassment. I also want to remind the summit that the courts have said that harassment is a form of discrimination. And we know that the Constitution protects us against discrimination, as well as the Employment Equity Act and so many other acts like PEPUDA as well. So we need to be very careful when we're dealing with this, and we need to start putting processes in place to give meaning to the policies that we currently have. We cannot sit back and allow harassment, bullying, and any kind of violence to find themselves in the workplace. This is not just a fight for women. It's a collective fight that we all must embrace, because if women don't move forward, feel protected, and are not fearful in the workplace, then as a country we can be productive or move forward at all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Colleagues, we've had a number of inputs. Thank you to all of the contributors. We have the Minister for Public Service and Administration who would like to make some inputs. We'll just get a microphone to you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I'm covered largely by the speakers that have spoken before me. Just to emphasize the issue on Convention 190, I was speaking to the DG to say that we need to ensure that it finds itself, the implementation of Convention 190 needs to find itself into the declaration itself. Because issues of workplace bullying, harassment, and all sorts of things, including violence, are rife. And what you see in the workplace is a mirror reflection of what South African society is. So as someone says that you become what you are because of what you experience in work, it also is because of what you experience in the home and in society. Because you bring some of the problems of violence at home, and that violence might not even be physical. It could be all sorts of things that are brought to the fore. And, you know, there was a time where I was at my very lowest, and I traveled to Cape Town to the military hospital for psychotherapy. And I think this is something that we all need to embrace as South Africans. Guys, we need help. You know, my psychiatrist said to me, and I'm not even ashamed to say I was going through a period of depression, because we hide these things and we don't talk about them. We suffer some type of depression of sorts, post-traumatic stress disorder if you come from the military. It's just what South Africa is about. And my psychiatrist said to me, because I said to him, you know, I'd like my protectors not to be here. Because I didn't want them to see that I was going into a psychiatric room to talk to a psychiatrist who was going to refer me to a psychotherapist. And my psychiatrist said to me, "You've got protectors with you." I said, "Yes." "Are they protecting you against physical damage or whatever?" I said, "Yes." And he says, "Then tell them that I am protecting you against mental damage." That to me was hugely profound, hugely profound. The effects of COVID-19, for those of you who have suffered the wrath of COVID-19, will know what they are both mentally and physically to individuals. And if you think forward, how does that affect performance in the workplace? We come out of the summit not having spoken about those things and resolved on how to deal with them. Because what my psychiatrist said is that every third person or second person that you meet in South Africa has got mental problems, but they don't know it. The good thing with you is that now you know. So you will be able to go for therapy. If medication is required, we will give you that medication. But at least you know. More than 90% of the population do not know that they suffer mental health. They get to work, it's exacerbated by the violent nature of the workplace itself. But not only the violent nature, the pressures that come with work, in the workplace, the bullying, all sorts of things. And for women, I must say, we were talking about this morning with the DM and the DG and the chairperson, after a conversation I'd had with the Tembalanga this morning, that the threshold, and the men will forgive me, I love men. I'm a daughter when I am a time. My father is a man. My son is a man, so I love men. I do love men. But I must say that the threshold for excellence in South Africa is measured on the mediocrity of men. Yes. So we have these mediocre men in positions, and we're all expected to perform at that level of mediocrity. Let women rise. Let them be supported. Because you see how a woman stretches a 10 rand in the home. And look at how a man stretches 10 rand in the home and measure the performance on that. The teacher says, so I think we need to have a more nuanced conversation around mental health care in South Africa. Denosa, Nehau, those of you who organize in the healthcare system, please take this thing very seriously. We will never have a country that flourishes if more than 90% of us are walking dead mentally. So this is something that I really think we need to look at. So partners of the PSCBC must take this matter seriously. I would really like for us, for those who are busy with the declaration, to find a way of crafting it so that the issue of mental health care, over and above that of physical health care, should find itself here. The other gentleman spoke about the 100 meters, and I didn't understand what he was talking about until the DM said the social distancing issue. South Africans are huggies. We like hugging one another. And COVID has made it so difficult for us to show love and affection to one another. I have a child who had COVID. Even today, she suffers, what do you call this, brain fog. How many of our employees here suffer brain fog? And the managers are not trained to see that and help the people that they supervise. So there's a lot of training, DG, of DPSA that we need to look at. Managers must be trained to identify, whilst they do performance management, they must be able to speedily see a decline in performance of those that were good performers and put interventions in place to assist people so that you don't punish them for a decline in performance. There is a very cogent reason for that decline in performance. And that decline in performance does not only affect the supervisor and the individual in the department, it affects our citizens. Because you go to frontline offices, you know, that's the general feeling. Because people are going through their own. They go to church for spiritual, mental health care, or mental care, whatever. But who do they go to for the mental one? Because even our hospitals, even our schools cannot deal with these children. Because even the teachers are not trained to deal with children who are going through psychotraumatic issues. So there's a lot of work that the civil service in itself needs to do before we can start talking about the vagaries of society. Those vagaries that we experience in society are mirrored in the public service. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you for sharing your personal experiences and breaking the silence on mental illness. And the need for capacitation, training, and awareness around this very, very serious ill that people just, especially in the workplace, employers, supervisors, managers, just brush aside and say, no, you're just being difficult, or you're being overly dramatic, or you're just a drama queen or king in this process. And we don't give enough serious attention or focus to such an important part of our well-being and overall health in the workplace as well. So thank you so much, Minister, for addressing that and bringing it through with your personal experience. Colleagues, I'm going to just give a moment to our speaker, Ms. Manogo, to give some of her wrapping thoughts now that she's had the opportunity to hear the inputs from the floor, and then we will conclude the session. Thank you, Ms. Manogo.
Thanks, Chair. I think I'm going to go in the order that the issues were raised, and appreciate these issues that have been raised, and also appreciate the Minister for sharing a personal experience, because sometimes these are the kind of issues that are looked at as being showing weakness, and I think that's why people would rather not share them, because people will think I'm weak. That's why I'm going through what I'm going through. The first one was Mr. Maku from Nihao. The first issue is the implementation of Resolution 6 of 2010, which departments, and when I presented, I indicated that unfortunately this is not an area where I can proudly say that, despite the fact that DPSA has provided the framework, there are very few departments that have implemented this. And I don't think I can even count 5 departments on my hand. But I know that at some stage, there is a group of departments around the sunny side, including the NSG, that had identified a school building there, where all the departments that were around there took their children for childcare. I know of one department in Limpopo that has been reporting that they've implemented this, but I can tell you that we do have the framework, but the implementation is not that great. The support of employees. Unfortunately, the workings of departments is such that this program lies in various units in the department, and if departments are not talking together, this case was not very clear, because I don't know where this interdict came from, and so on and so on. And until we have full facts, I'm afraid I may not be able to give you any response on this one. If you don't mind, I'm sitting somewhere there in front. Please give us the full facts, and we should be able to know which unit in the department needs to be assisting this person. Yes, we understand in future, unfortunately, the nature of the guideline in terms of this presentation is such that we had to show the progress in terms of numbers, etc., for employment equity. I have a standing presentation that details how the frameworks have been implemented over the years, how the policies have been implemented over the years, but unfortunately I didn't share it here because of the nature of the instruction on how we prepare it. The last one for Mr. Makumu was on the infrastructure. The policy on reasonable accommodation and assistive devices also has a monitoring tool where departments will report on an annual basis the number of employees that they have in the department, those that are receiving assistive devices and reasonable accommodation, and what are the costs of this. So if a department is not implementing, it's not for lack of guidance, because the policy is very clear, from the provision of personal assistance, etc. Even provision of transport, how they are supposed to do it. It is provided there, and which is even based on a resolution of this body. The policy has taken that resolution and included it there to guide departments on how they can provide this. Yes, it was an input which I'm very happy, because sometimes when it comes from you, you know, a person who's in the middle of it, it will look like I'm, you know, this English sometimes, I'm a very blunt person, let me be, you know, declare that up front. So I'm trying to get a polite or diplomatic way to put what I want to put. I'm happy that you raised it because sometimes when it comes from us, it's like we are defending, or, you know, we are trying to make this subject more important than you know, what it should be. So I'm happy if you are saying that you need to see this becoming part of the resolution. That is a question that I've been asking myself. Why is this outside? It is not part of those that were discussed there. Maybe it's because it's not important enough. So, issues of sexual harassment are very difficult in that there is only so much that a policy can do. Most of the issues depend on, you know, you and I. How do we behave, we ourselves, how do we behave when it comes to not only being guided by the policy, our moral standing, where when I look at, you know, a child who's coming into a department as an intern, I look at this child as my child who needs guidance instead, you know, being sent from pillar to post and getting promised a job by somebody who does not even have appointing powers. But because this young person is desperate, come from a very vulnerable, you know, environment, and doesn't even know that this person may end up just getting sexual favors, but doesn't have the appointing powers. And sometimes you only hear about it when this promise has not been delivered. When it's still happening, you never get to hear about it. And when I say that as individuals, we have a responsibility. We have cases when an intern will report this case on a Friday. And then just as people are still preparing to get the investigations and so on, this child is called to the DG or the minister's house on Sunday and comes back on Monday as an assistant director and cancels the case. We have such, incidents. What do you expect the police to do in such cases? We have this, DG, who made you not laugh. We have this that we're dealing with. What do? I can't report this on behalf of somebody, DG. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. So we have these issues. I think I'm throwing it back to us as parents. When I look at this child, I should be looking at this child as mine, not as somebody else's child. Messendorf, I believe yours were more of an input, which we appreciate. And I hope you are not going to give up. And I'm going to support you in this case that in my past life, I was also responsible for the development of the employment equity plan. And let me tell you that I used to fight with my department in my past life, where the employment equity plan will be so beautiful, and then by the time we report, there is nothing that we had in the employment equity plan that we are reporting. We are reporting something else. And this is also something that I've also raised with colleagues in the Department of Employment and Labor, that sometimes there is a disjuncture between the employment equity plan and what people report, and it needs to be dealt with. I'm not going to talk about the issues of cadre deployment, although I don't have any fears for career limitations. I've passed that stage. I have no fear. I'm past that. Maybe for young people, it's something that they may be afraid of. Advocate, again, the review of the structures. Yes, we do have issues where complaints are based on the location of these coordinators in departments, their levels, and even the staffing, because you will have only one person that deals with this program in a very huge department, and you expect them to have some form of impact. Yes, in November, I think 2014, we gave inputs in the organizational structure for Program 1 to try and locate these units in under the strategic planning unit, because we were hoping that this is how this program can maybe get expression in strategic plans and APPs. OSDIPSI, I think you got an offer for help just where you are sitting, and I hope you are going to take it up and deal with. Yes, this is an issue because I believe that as a senior manager, you are indestructible, which is not true. And I think Ms. Moodley went to town, more especially in the area of education. And I can support you that the reports that we have from PESA specifically, the highest numbers of sexual harassment are in the Department of Education. And it's quite scary, actually. And I'm happy that you went to go to the legislation that talks about the liability of the employer. We have it even in the policy. We have included it that if you don't act decisively when you are aware that there are issues of sexual harassment, then you should know. But in government, I think you know what the problem is. Because even with the meeting of targets, when there are fines that are levied, who pays? The HOD, do they pay from their pocket, or is the department that you pay? You know how difficult that is going to be at the end of the day. And I think that was the last one. I'm not going to say anything about what the minister said, but I can assure you, Minister, we are going to, on our side, review our policy to address C-190 and the good of practice. Thank you.
A very big round of applause indeed for this presentation. Minister, I want to assure you that we will certainly make sure that this issue features in the declaration, so that we don't lose it out when we go to implementation of the policies and so forth, and we develop the programs to address the issues as it raised here. We should also include, us familiarizing ourselves with the latest amendments of the Criminal Procedures Act that seeks to address these issues sharply, to protect and to deal with these issues of sexual harassment and how we report these issues. The bills have passed. It's now in the law that we then have to take these matters serious, and we can report on behalf of those that are afraid to report and so forth, and we pick up those things again, then report on their behalf so that these matters can be taken up. So this is an issue that we need to take very serious, so that we offer that necessary protection to the children, to the women, and then all others at work. Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. Minister, we've come to that part where the summit will then have to reflect on the work that has taken place since the beginning of this summit in the form of declaration. But we are going to make this request that we break for tea, so that we allow the drafting team some few minutes just to wrap up, so that we also include the issues that will be discussed in this last session. We break for tea and we come back at 11:30, so that then we come and declare as the summit. Can we stand agenda until 11:30? Thank you.